Torque back again. Today we're going to be looking at the Alation Cloud Catalog Connector for Qlik Application Automation. I'm specifically going to use it today in order to move a specific space, all of the applications within it, all of the sheets within those applications, and all of the objects on the sheets within each application to Alation's Cloud Catalog. Hope you have as much fun in watching this as I have making it. And the first thing that I'm going to do is get a list of my BI servers. In order to connect to my Alation Cloud Catalog, I obviously do a connection just like for anything else. And all you're going to do is give that connection a name. You're going to give it your username and password for your Alation tenant. And so it's looking for the instance name. You'll see up here that it's Qlik.Alation Catalog for me. You'll use your own company or whatever your branding is. And what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to use our APIs. The APIs need to talk to a virtual server in Alation. In order to create a virtual server, you go to Apps and Sources, and you come down and take a look at your BI servers, and you will add a BI server. And the key thing here is for you to pick Custom API, and that will create what they consider to be a virtual server. So if I look at my list of these things back here, you'll see that I've got these. And if I look at this server, it tells me it's a type virtual. So this is the server I'm looking at. And you notice that I've got server number 40 here. So you can get the number that you need in order to do all of the work that you're going to do in Qlik Application Automation, or you can come and list the servers. So the first connector I'm going to look at here is this list servers, and really literally all it does is talk to that connection and say, give me a list of all of those BI servers. And you know that I always love to use the output. So I'm going to go ahead and run this really quickly. And it's going to output and give me the server. So if you don't notice that server name is up here, you're good to go. You can copy, you can get that list of servers. So in the JSON package that you have now, that's part of my article, I can move that thing out, and then I can move the rest of these in. And you'll see my first step is to set that variable number, because everything else that I do in Alation, the very first thing it's going to say is, hey, what server are you working with? So the first thing I do is I set that variable so that I have that aside, and then I don't have to worry about having all of the different connectors, me having to retype those things. So the first thing that you'll do in editing the JSON package that you got is set your server number once you set your connection for Alation, and then you should be pretty good to go. Easy breezy, I iterate through my spaces. You'll notice I've put a conditional statement in here. Is this the space that I want? The only space that I want for this particular work is the Qlik World 2023 space. I just kind of wanted to limit it so that I'm not being overwhelmed looking at this as I'm testing everything as I'm developing it. And you could do the same thing. If you don't want the conditional in there, obviously just move this whole stack back under and get rid of the condition, and it'll output every single space. And so what this does at a high level is it's going to iterate through my spaces. It's going to add the space to Alation, and it's going to do it as a folder. And so the folder connector here, you can see it takes the server number, it takes the space ID, which I've set as a variable, and it takes the space name. Now I can set that space name as a variable as well. You can watch my video on variables. I can set that as object, so I can have as many variables as I want about each space, about each app I'm going to iterate through. I save the space ID because the ID is needed in many other places, but the name isn't. So if I'm only going to use it once, I don't bother to set a variable. If I'm going to use it multiple times, I set the variable. You'll notice here I go to sleep. And so I say, hey, I need you to pause for about 10 seconds, because the APIs for Alation are asynchronous. That means it creates a job that goes into a queue, and there could be hundreds, thousands of people working in the Alation server. They all could be doing other things as well. And so things are not instantaneous. So when I say add that folder, it is moving on. And I'm coming right down to here. If that folder is not added, then when I try to add apps, it may add the apps to the root node, not under the space. And so you'll see in here that I've got times. These times work for me great. In your environment, your Alation server might be swamped with a whole bunch of people running things against it and using APIs for different reasons. You may need to adjust that time, and the time is in seconds. So once I've added the folder, I say, hey, go to sleep for 10 seconds. Then I say, hey, I want to list the apps. And I'm going to iterate through those. You'll notice I've got outputs. And any of my outputs here, you are always welcome to say, I want to disable that. I don't need to see that in the output. The output is for me because I like to go through as I'm debugging, building this for you. I like to be able to see those output statements. So you can leave them, you can disable them, you can remove them. As I go through and I iterate through the apps, I set that application ID because again, I'm going to need that several other places. Now you'll notice here I don't use folder, I use object. The reason for that, with the folder, as I showed you, with the folder you can have the external ID, you can have a name, but you notice I don't get to tell it where the parent is. With the object, I get to tell it where the parent is, and I also get to set my own object type. And so what I want to see is I want to see my space listed, then I want to see the applications listed under it, and I want the applications to have the name application as the type. So I've set the server number, the application ID, the name of the app, and I set that parent folder so that it goes underneath the space. Again, I need to go to sleep. This is an asynchronous environment. I think it can create the application pretty fast, but it does take time because there could be a lot of people using it. Once I've created that application now and I've waited my however many seconds, I want to go through and list my sheets. So I'm listing the sheets for the current application, and it will come back and loop through all of these as a loop. Again, I love to output everything so that I know what I'm working on, how far things are going. I set a variable for that sheet ID because I will need that sheet ID again. I've set a connection here, just a conditional for your benefit. What I'm saying here is I want to make sure that these are published sheets. I do not want to send to Alation private sheets because that work is mine and it's still in progress. So there's no sense cataloging metadata about things that I haven't really published yet. It's kind of like it's still under development and I could change it 100 times today, so why bother storing it? Again, you do not have to have that conditional. If you want to store private sheets, you're welcome to store those private sheets, but consider the fact that your private sheets aren't necessarily viewable by anyone else, and when you run this automation as you're not going to be connected to that Qlik Cloud as them, so you won't get their private sheets stored anyway. So consider, you might want to consider leaving that conditional in there. Again, I add an object because now I want to add the sheet name to the parent folder of the application. So I'm trying to create that tree-like structure, and these nodes need to know who the parent is. Again, I go to sleep. What I found in my testing was I needed a little bit longer for the objects to wait for the sheet to get created because I was burning through this kind of fast, and QAA just keeps moving on. And so I had a little bit longer timeout for these. Again, you can adjust these based on your environment and what it is you're doing. Then I list the objects on the sheet. The objects could be KPIs, they could be filter panes, they could be trees, they could be maps. Doesn't really matter. It's all the objects. Again, I love using variables because I know I'll use these things a lot. I get the object properties because I'm going to need some other metadata. When it lists the object, it basically gives you the ID. I'm going to end up wanting to have the title for it and the type of object it is. And so I actually use the type of object that it is as the object type for the Alation catalog. And I want to add the objects to the sheet ID. Now I'm going to go ahead and press run here, and then I will end up kind of fast forwarding the video, but I'm going to let this run so you can see the output as what's going on, and then we'll come back and I'm going to kind of freeze frame the video and move forward so that we can actually look at what is in Alation then. So it's going to start up. These output statements are going to tell you what it's doing, which is exactly why I do these things. So it's got our first application here. You'll continue to see this thing churn. Now it's just waiting the time, right? It added our space, it had to wait, added an application, it's waiting. Now it's going to add the sheet. It's going to wait for a while, and it's going to begin adding objects. So you'll continue to see that roll. After refreshing our page for the virtual server, we can see that we do indeed have this Qlik World 23 added as a BI folder. If we go into our space here, we can see the applications that we've added. If I were to choose an application and continue driving down this tree, we see the sheets that are there. If I pick any one of these sheets, like the database details sheets, I can see each and every object that was part of that sheet. You see I've got KPIs and pivot tables and filter panes. If I look at a different sheet, perhaps, you'll see I've got the filter panes, bar charts, maps, tables. Any object that you have in Qlik is going to get exported along with that type. And each one of these, you'll notice that, hey, this sheet is my virtual sheet. If I were to go into one of the filter panes, you'll notice that it has that type called filter pane because that's what my object type was. If I wanted to continue down the tree, I could say, let me see the dimensions or measures that are available for the filters. Let me see the dimensions and measures that were available for my bar chart or for my KPI, or a list of all my dimensions that are there for my columns. Anything that you choose, you could continue driving down just by looping through those objects as needed. One alternative to what I just showed you could be that maybe you add another object underneath each application, and maybe you want to call it sheets, and you want the object type to be sheets, and you're going to add it to the application. What you're going to need to do is you're going to have to give it a special ID then. So I'm going to take the application ID and add 10 to it. So this is this application's sheets. What it would end up happening now is when I add a sheet, you'll notice that the parent folder needs to be the application ID minus 10 as well. And that could be any other string you want concatenated to it. So that if I'm looking at an application, and now this is in a different virtual server, you'll see that it has a list of a block for sheets that is the sheets type. And if I go into it, I can then see each of the sheets that are part of that virtual sheets object type. The reason I might want something like that is I might want to separate the sheets from the master dimensions, from the master measures, from the master visualizations. And so this could become a really robust project where you are outputting everything about the application, and you just want to keep it a little bit more centered so that there's a very defined tree structure rather than seeing all the sheet names and all the master measures and all the master items right under the application itself. Are there more blocks than what I've showed you in the video today? You better believe there are a lot more blocks. There's lots and lots more blocks. You could do things more traditional like creating the data sources, identifying tables and fields and columns and all of that kind of thing. You can get moved over into Alation as well. And you can also bring those things from Alation back and put them out in the Qlik Cloud if that's what you wanted to do. You could call their API for get lineage information, or to get a query, or to check the job status, because as I mentioned, these jobs are asynchronous. I could create this, it will return a job ID, and then I could go continue to loop until that job has completed rather than just putting the timing in. So there are an awful lot more things the Qlik Application Automation team has done for you, as you can see by my scrolling there. If there's any new APIs that come out from Alation, you can always use the raw API request that would contact their server using the connection, call whatever APIs that you want to do from there. But the video today was specifically focused on just trying to move a space, the applications for it, the sheets for it, the objects for it, so that you would understand how this really special connector, this add object works, where you're able to set that parent folder so you can create any type of tree hierarchy you want. Hope you have a great day.